What is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa. And of course, as always, I am your humble host, Nico House. I actually was trying to go live a little bit earlier today, but for whatever reason, my computer was not having it. They did not want me to go live. They did not want me to bring this message to you. So we're going to bring it anyway. We're going to bring it today. So first, before I get started, I want to say make sure that if you have not yet, go to Tulsi2020.com. Hope to reach that goal of 130,000 donors. I do want to give a big congratulations to Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang just reached his 130,000 donor mark, which I think it was 2 days ago he hit it. So congratulations to Andrew Yang. Big milestone. Getting into the third and fourth debates is actually something that is not easily accomplished, especially with the pool of candidates taking attention and media away from the candidates who are trying to do something new and revolutionary. So congratulations to Andrew Yang there. I think Marianne Williamson is actually close to getting it as well. Tulsi has gotten about 12 to 13,000 donations since the debates, and that number has grown steadily since. She's getting about 2,000 to 3,000 donations a day, which is dope. That's good stuff. That means she's reaching new people. And according to a poll that I just saw, or according to a graph that I just saw, Tulsi actually has gotten the most positive uptick in interactions since the debate. So that's good as well. So yeah, let's make sure she gets on the debate stage. And what I'm about to talk to you about today will probably be another reason why you may feel it necessary to donate to her and make sure she gets on that debate stage. Because let me tell you, the Democrats, I've seen the Democrats do a lot of shady stuff. The Republicans as well, but when the Republicans are doing shady things, it's a little bit more overt, right? Because they don't care. They're people. They fearmonger people. They are identitarians, much like a lot of the establishment of the Democrats. But they're better at it, so they get away with a lot more in a lot more of an overt way. But the Democrats are different. The Democrats are sleazy. The Democrats are trifling. And what they just did to Tulsi Gabbard, and how they just screwed your democracy up in a way that you wouldn't have thought imaginable. But hey, Democrats always reaching for new heights, right? You should be absolutely outraged. I know there's a lot of Tulsi haters out there. The reasons that y'all hate on Tulsi, to be quite honest with you, objectively, I don't understand it. And the same people who tend to attack Tulsi actually defend Elizabeth Warren will never understand that either. And maybe it's just the fact of the matter is, to all players who are not acting in good faith, who are acting based off of personal interest and maybe a personal desire or an emotional association with some individual or some demographic that's represented by their candidate, maybe they're acting on behalf of their own self-interest. Maybe that's it. And it's totally irrational because you're screwing yourself, in my opinion, when you're not catching things like this, because nobody, not at least the public at large, isn't demanding these type of stories, which is why it's not being covered. And people aren't being given a financial incentive to do so. This story is insane. Did y'all know Tulsi Gabbard introduced the Securing America's Elections Act in the first time was in 2017-ish. Then she introduced it actually a second time in March. She talked about it on the very first interview that I did with her live. It was myself, Fiorella, and Pasta. Then she discussed it again on the Jimmy Dore show. She discussed it on TYT. She discussed it on her own channel. She discussed it on Twitter. She discussed it on Bill Maher recently. Most of you are familiar with it. It is the Securing America's Elections Act, which would require hand-counted paper ballots, hand-marked paper ballots that are permanently preserved. And if you are going to use a machine to count them, they can't be able to connect to the internet. And then even still, they have to actually be able to pull those hand-counted paper ballots up at any point for inspection. So it was a great piece of legislation. Could have went even a few steps further, but it was a huge step in the right direction. It was going to streamline the electoral process and make sure that we don't have any of this nonsense that we've been seeing from state to state, different states leveraging the power of their individual establishment parties and screwing over the people based on who they want to win. It was great. Most of you all, if you were new to the channel, probably didn't hear about it because, weirdly enough, although everybody wanted to complain about Russia, everybody wants to complain about election integrity, everybody wants to complain about election fraud, oh, we're getting cheated, we're getting cheated, we're getting cheated, nobody wanted to cover this particular piece of legislation, even though it would have revolutionized how elections would take place going forward. So Democrats didn't talk about this, and no one even co-signed. No one co-sponsored her legislation. Isn't that crazy? Russia, cybersecurity. Everybody's attacking our elections. Somebody's hacking our elections. Putin is the most evil madman in the world. We have to hold him accountable. Or also, just want to raise my hand. How about we make sure that no one can hack our elections? No, that's stupid, Tulsi. That's stupid. Why would we do something like that? Why would anybody cover it, right? Democrats took advantage of the progressives in this movement. They took advantage of the people who would rather discuss AOC wagging her finger at the establishment as long as they're Republican. They would rather, bicker about someone saying they would want private health care, not have private health care, even though Tulsi has already been unequivocally for Medicare for all for her entire career. Bernie's for the exact same legislation, he introduced it, and we're really arguing pettiness over whether or not supplementary insurance should be private. Like, that's the stuff people want to argue about. Semantics over bullshit when our entire democracy is at risk right now. The Democrats, because no one was paying attention, because no one called attention to this legislation and no one was tracking it, at least outside of this channel, were able to steal Tulsi Gabbard's legislation, rename it, and by rename it, I mean they added the word federal to it. That was what they changed it to. Instead of the Securing America's Elections Act, it's called the Securing America's Federal Elections Act. That's what it's called now. Yeah. Isn't that just dandy? They took that legislation while she was prepping for the debate here in Miami. And she was at the Fish Fry, I believe, on the 24th in South Carolina with Bernie, actually. They introduced it in May, but it kind of went under the radar. Everything after that happened from the 24th through the 26th. Yes, that means that multiple Congress people weren't even there to vote on it. Multiple Congress people weren't even there to have their say. And they didn't even tell Tulsi. The same people who are claiming that Tulsi is not good on domestic policy, that her policies don't get any traction, that she isn't speaking to the important issues. Guess what? They just took her with legislation, added the word federal, watered it down beyond belief, but used some of these very specific rhetoric of her legislation and took her name completely off of it. And I'm going to explain to you why they did that in a second. So here's the person who took credit for it. Her name is Congresswoman Lofgren, and she's a Democrat from California. She got a bunch of co-sponsors too. None of those co-sponsors actually signed on to Tulsi's legislation. A better version of this legislation. Now, the article where I found this out at, by the way, please tag me. When you find information out like this, I greatly appreciate that. I would have never seen this because clearly Tulsi didn't know about it. Their policy people found out about it around the same exact time I did. And that was almost days later. So this article is from rollcall.com, where it says the House passed an election security measure Thursday that would require voting systems to use backup paper ballots in federal contests, while also mandating improvements to the higher tech side of the polls. The full chamber voted 225 to 184 to send the bill to the Senate, where it faces stiff oppositions from Republicans. House Democrats fast-tracked the bill to the floor after it cleared the administrative committee by a party line vote. One Republican, Brian Mast, voted for the measure. No Democrats voted against this. This is so, thanks for the super chat, Amina, I appreciate it. This is so problematic in so many ways, people. Listen, it's already bad enough that Congress people voted on this legislation. Knowing Tulsi's legislation had already been introduced in March, they introduced this piece of legislation in May. But what's wild to me is the fact that Amy Klobuchar brags about this on Twitter because it is basically the heir apparent to her legislation in the Senate. So in other words, as Tulsi was standing not even arm's length from Amy Klobuchar had seen her multiple times during the debate, prior to it and after, I'm sure. Amy Klobuchar knew that this was going on behind closed doors and did absolutely nothing about it. Do you understand that? Did nothing about it. She allowed Tulsi's legislation to get stolen right under her nose while she was prepping for the debate. But it gets worse. Not only did the legislation just watered down, it is actually horrific for our democracy. Because what it does is it requires the voting machines to be made here in the United States, right? Doesn't sound all that bad. But what it actually does is now it puts the contract of voting machines in the hands of corporations. And these corporations pay off, whatever party they choose to at the time. But if the Democrats wink, wink, nudge, nudge, hey, we're going to give you contracts to these machines. So we're going to need some cooperation, if you catch my drift, to make sure we stay in office. So the Democrats just basically sold off our democracy to the highest American bidder who can manufacture these machines. Oh, but it gets worse. It does. See, Tulsi and her policy team are smart. They said, hey, some of you, to keep up with federal regulation, may need to improve your current elections infrastructure. That's perfectly fine. Let us know what you have to spend to get it done. Send us the check, or send us the receipt. We'll send you a check. For any overpayments, you will be required to fully to pay that back to the federal government. And that's the way we make sure we don't end up spending way too much money to do something that shouldn't take that much. But this bill is different, as you probably would have expected. This bill just gave guaranteed funding to states all across the country. They just put a bunch of earmarks in there, which is another reason. It's another thing that this bill did. And if Tulsi, of course, would have known about this, which is why they wouldn't tell her, Tulsi would have called it out. Tulsi would have started pointing fingers, and Tulsi would have started naming names. If her staff knew about this, if her team knew about this, if her policy staff knew about this, this would have never flown under the bridge like that. Why do you think that it never made the news? It never made the news until it got passed. How does election integrity legislation that is legitimate get passed almost unanimously by Democrats, establishment Democrats, and it never makes the news until it actually gets passed? Me thinks not. Me thinks that's a little bit suspicious. And here's why it's suspicious. Every state will get a total, not individually, but a grand total, will be dispersed $600 million to bolster election security. Biannually, they will get $125 million, which is, here you go. Here you go. Here's some money. Here's some free money. That's basically what just happened. Tulsi's legislation doesn't work like that. Tulsi's legislation makes sure that you write down the requirements that you cannot meet. Once again, show us where you paid for them, and we will reimburse you. Because she did not want this type of thing to happen. So once again, Tulsi displaying foresight that's being completely ignored by the Democrats. Tulsi and her policy team, I should say. There is no automatic or even a mandatory audit for these pieces, for the new piece of legislation. See, for Tulsi's legislation, the audit process is federally regulated. In other words, a state can't, Brenda Snipes, if you will, the one who threw away all the ballots for Tim Canova's race, she wouldn't be able to unilaterally create rules that would undermine democracy and without being held accountable by the federal government. Oh man, it's not that way anymore. If this passes in the Senate, this legislation, in a true middle finger to, you really thought this was going to be an election integrity bill? You thought that? To everyone who cares about promoting actual democracy and election integrity, they said, and even though we've given you all of this nonsense about how we're going to streamline this process and make it more accountable, we're going to allow the audit process if you want to dispute your election. Those rules will be set by individual state commissions. In other words, everything that we just said is completely and totally irrelevant, because if you break the rules, the state will determine how you are able to combat the election results. So if it's a Democrat and you're in a Democratic primary, which is a federal election, and you want to challenge the Democrat who cheated in a federal election, and the head of the commissions is also a Democrat, how do you think that's going to go in the audit process? If you're a Republican, same thing. They took Tulsi's legislation, watered it down, allow American companies to monopolize voter machines, the same American corporations who donate insane amounts of money to the Democratic Party get what they want. Then they attach hundreds of millions of dollars in earmarks, unnecessary earmarks. Unnecessary earmarks, bruh, that are unlimited. In other words, every other year, these earmarks will be now spent, regardless of whether or not the states need it. $600 million up front, $125 million to each individual state. And if you know anything about state budgets, that's a lot of damn money for a lot of these states. Then to make matters worse, yeah, they still have the hand counted paper ballots, but the requirements for the machines are different than the requirements in Tulsi's bill. Obviously, Tulsi's bill, those machines cannot connect to the internet. They have to be manually inspected and approved. There's a whole, if you want to use a machine, there's a whole litany of rules you have to use or have to apply. And then if you don't comply by these rules for the machines, the elections are thrown out. The moment that it is found that faulty machines are used, as defined by Tulsi legislation, the elections are not legitimate. And this can be done for up to a year. So you can deregister and challenge elections for up to a year. Not with this one. In this legislation, yeah, we're going to do some hand-marked paper ballots and we'll use some kind of okay machine. They call it limited risk auditing. And instead, they make it so that the states, because everybody remembers New York Board of Elections and how that went, right? Whenever all of the people who were registered were going to vote for Bernie, got their registrations dropped in Brooklyn. How did that get handled? Oh, we found out that the Board of Elections was actually behind it. So I'm sure that everybody is looking forward to the chief of the elections board in whatever respective state. Everybody's looking forward to that. to them making the rules for how you audit an election. This is insanity. This is ridiculous. And everybody should be outraged. Do you understand something? I want to be very brief on this. I don't care if you're a Tulsi supporter or not. You're being told she's at 1% or 2% in the polls. Cool. So if she's really at 1% or 2% in the polls, why is she having 100,000 hit pieces written on her? Why is the Democratic Party actively conspiring against her at every turn if she's not that important, if her message isn't that impactful, if she doesn't mean what she says and does what she means? Why is it that the Democrats wait until she's not in the room to take her legislation, take her name off of it, add earmarks to it, water it down, monopolize the machines so that American corporations can manufacture them, and basically hands over the accountability process to the very people who have been corrupting our electoral process to begin with? Why? Because they knew Tulsi would not stand for that shit. They knew it. They knew it. And here we are. People are still talking about Tulsi as a progressive. Then why steal her legislation? If she's an establishment shill, then her legislation should have been perfectly suitable for the establishment. We're about to see, they steal her message. It's kind of like with Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, right? With Elizabeth Warren, they say, why do we need Bernie if we can have Elizabeth Warren? Well, motherfucker, why do we need Elizabeth Warren if we can have Bernie? I don't understand. Because the establishment only attacks those who are a threat to them. Why isn't Inslee being attacked like Tulsi is? Why is it Swalwell being attacked like Tulsi is? They're not polling that well. Why is it that Tulsi supposedly has zero chance, has no support, nobody likes her, XYZ? So why is she being attacked? Why is NBC dedicating articles to her? Why is MSNBC superimposing pimples onto her face during the debates? Out of curiosity, if she's not a threat. Y'all better start waking up to the truth about your allies. None of this is happening to Elizabeth Warren. They don't wait till she leaves the room and then steals her legislation. We've seen this happen to Bernie's Medicare for All, right? Where they try to, except for they can't hide it from him because, Bernie is he's ever present. You can't hide when you're trying to cheat him. Not anymore. Not in the Senate anyway. But they try to Medicare for some, or for some. Medicare for all who want it. Like, nah, it's not going to work. But with Tulsi, and if they did do that, you would know about it, right? Because everybody would cover it. Well, let's see who covers this. Let's see who covers the fact that Tulsi, who supposedly is not good on domestic policy, who supposedly, an establishment sleeper cell, who supposedly is not progressive, just had her legislation, her progressive legislation, stolen right from under her nose while she's out campaigning to save the world. It's utterly disgusting. You know how it took me 24 hours to calm down before I even did this report. Not even joking. Let me cover some of these super chats and then we're going to head out of chill. Elias, thank you very much. Joey Irk, Tulsi 2020, the army sent me to Germany, but I pray. Man, Germany's not a bad place to be with the military. So with that being said, people, I'll see you soon. Got a couple more live streams coming. But if I don't get to catch you, always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.